I think what we're going to see over the next 24 months is an acceleration of European investment that are going to start buying stuff very, very quickly. Now, it may not be coming off an assembly line or be built yet, but the capitals are going to want to spend this money, and they're going to want to demonstrate it before the next NATO summit.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Future of GovCon. This is a weekly podcast to bring together experts from across the industry and look at what's happening today and how it's going to impact the future of our industry. I'm Jake Frazer. I'm the owner and CEO of Precision Talent Solutions. In leading one of the industry's top executive search firms, I get to talk to influencers every day. C-suite executives, board members, growth leaders, top government officials, military flag officers. And on this podcast, what we're doing is we're bringing in these experts from AI, from space, from medical, from logistics, from engineering. And we're sitting down and talking about what's happening in their specific area of the industry and how it will impact the future. So pour a cup of coffee and let's get started. Hey everybody, it's Jake. Welcome back to another episode of the Future of GovCon. Today we have with us a real expert on European defense. Recently retired Major General Matt van Wagenen is calling in from Bavaria. Matt, good morning.
Hey, Jake, good morning. Good to be here with you to talk about all things European defense today.
And this is defense with a C, right? That's how you can tell. Yeah, so Matt's, where are you this morning, Matt? Are you in Garmisch?
I'm in Austria right now.
Oh, you're in Austria. Okay. Well, he's lucky enough. He's living the dream. Matt has managed to not only get out of the Army unscathed, but also to settle down and live in Garmisch, which is a dream for most anybody to have the chance to live in Garmisch.
Yeah, it's an incredible place to live. I'm lucky to settle down there. After I retire, Jake, I'm going to stay in Europe, live here, and stay attached to European defense and investing.
Yeah. So, how long have you lived in Europe and worked in Europe now, Matt?
I mean, I've got about 22 years living in Europe, on and off. Obviously, not straight of a 35-year career. So it's broken up between. I lived in the UK for 3 years, a little bit over. I lived in Germany, the preponderance, but also in Poland. And then during the reinvasion of the Ukraine in 2022, I lived down in the Black Sea area in Romania, in Bulgaria for a long, long time.
Wow. So yeah, that's the theme here. We're going to talk today about European defense. I mean, Matt has a great career around NATO, but he's worked with so many of the European ministries of defense. He's been integrated into, he was kind of the hub of activity at SHAPE, where he worked for Chris Cavoli, where he was the deputy chief of staff for operations, essentially the three at SHAPE, during probably one of the busiest times in NATO history, frankly. Matt had his finger on the control of a lot of what was happening across NATO. So we're going to explore a little bit about his perspective, about where we are today in European defense. And, the macro trends are there, the funding is there. So we're going to pick Matt's brain about where he sees investments going in the future of European defense. How about that, Matt?
Yeah, I think 2022 marked a lot of things, Jake, for European defense, right? We saw a resurgent Russia that, many nations never thought they would see again. An imperialistic Russia that has ambitions, far beyond the Ukraine, right? So, if you look at the alliance over the last 30 years, I mean, it was in a disinvestment, right? Many nations took their armies to the ground. NATO was involved in out-of-area operations, very programmed, very supporting of the U.S. in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. But what it really saw was the peace dividend come in, and we saw the disinvestment in European defense, and it was reprogrammed into many things like social welfare programs and education and other things. So it's going to be a long climb to come back. I think the biggest challenge, Jake, out there is going to be procurement. I mean, many of these nations have not procured anything in decades, and learning how to do that again inside their Ministry of Armaments or Defense is going to be very challenging.
I mean, even look at the U.S. procurement. We've been doing it at scale, at speed for decades, and still not very good at it. I mean, we're still trying to reform our own procurement, but maybe there's a chance for the Europeans to learn from the end of our loop. Maybe there's a chance for the Europeans to learn from us and the area of procurement. I agree. That's probably one of the weakest points. That and just political will, right?
Yeah, I mean, and again, and the nations are going to have their own debates of like, what do you invest in, right? And a lot of them are going to want to keep it national. Like they're not going to want to buy, platforms or equipment, outside of their own nations if they can do it. But most of them don't have the production capability to achieve that.
Yeah, true. Well, I want to get into that deeply, but I do want to look back a little bit. I always like to get to know our guest a little bit about the people behind the general or the ambassador who we have on the screen that day. But it's Matt has a fantastic reputation. We figured out in our pre-call chat, we just missed each other by about 6 months there in Schweinfurt, Germany, in three-quarter cav, which is that's a stop-off point for all the great leaders in the industry is three-quarter cav. Well, it's then 1/4 cav when we reflag, but that's pretty cool. We probably shared some of the same stomping grounds there in Schweinfurt, Germany, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, it was the start of my career, decades ago, as a young cavalry officer in Schweinfurt, Germany. I tell you, Jake, like we talked about, still in contact with many of the officers I served with there, because it was a remarkable unit. It did remarkable things in Bosnia, and I tell you, it probably rooted me for who I was for the next 30 some years. Anybody that says in a young officer's career in the military that the first units don't impact on everything you're going to do, they're dead wrong. So it was incredible leadership there that has guided me for years.
Yeah, it's still a brotherhood for sure. Talk about growing up. You're from Pittsburgh, is that right?
I did. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh. I grew up. We were in the steel industry there. My father was for a long time, and you know, the city of Pittsburgh was a different place back then. It was the largest steel producing center point in the world, and I kind of in my lifetime there kind of saw that and the demise of it really in only a few years. In Pittsburgh kind of grind into nothing. Now there's a renaissance there. It's going on now for a long time. Where Pittsburgh's a new city. The Steelers are still there, and the Pirates are still there, and the Penguins. But it's transformed, and it's a remarkable place. I was lucky to grow up there.
Kind of a metaphor, right? Pittsburgh, where you just see the complete rebirth of a city.
Yeah. Yep.
So, how about you went to school in Marquette? Is that right? Just up the road?
Oh, yeah. I'm a Jesuit educated kid, Catholic educated all my life. I'm an accidental soldier. I mean, I never wanted to go in the military. As part of the demise of the steel industry was the demise of my father's job. He also became unemployed, and so I had to find a way to pay for school. And I ran into a sergeant in the gym. That was wearing an Army uniform. And he said, "Hey, do you want to be an ROTC? We'll pay for your school." And kind of the rest is history. But I had no ambition on ever going into the Army, and then I fell into it, loved it, and became an armor officer.
So, were you branch pure armor all the way
I
through?
was branch pure armor. Yep.
Yeah, that was my demise too. I did the same thing. So, your first unit coming right out of ROTC was coming to Schweinfurt. Is that right?
Is actually I went to Erlangen, Germany. I met my wife there to 270 Armor, but I was only there for a very short time because it was the end of the Cold War, and as you remember, in Germany, we were going from 350,000 soldiers down to about at that time 150. So I was at Erlangen for a short time as a tank platoon leader, and then went up to Schweinfurt, and a guy by the name of General J.D. Thurman hired me up there.
J.D. Thurman, right? Legend. Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about this evolution of NATO, right? And you were straddling kind of the NATO 1.0, the old Cold War NATO, right? The defense of the Fulda Gap and the Meiningen Gap, and the new NATO, which I know you left the unit right before we went to Bosnia, but that's when NATO started kind of projecting itself outside of its own borders, right?
Yeah, I mean, I came in at the end of the Cold War. Uh, in fact, the first year I went to, like most of the people returning back from the Gulf, they had been down in Desert Storm, and it was kind of what was going to be the mission, and then of course 2.0 is really is the Western Balkans, right? It's Bosnia. It's the great work that NATO did down there, and it's of course it's Kosovo. It's KFOR that's still ongoing today, and then I think 2003, you see the evolution to 2.0 as NATO signs up after 9/11, enacts Article 5 to support the U.S. in long-term out-of-area operations in Afghanistan. I was involved in all that for a very long time. And then, in 2022, you see this evolution from kind of 2.0 to 2.5, where Allied Command Operations shape the headquarters, SACEUR, Chris Cavoli has to kind of, he's got to kind of reinvent the concept for collective self-defense. In the time I was at SHAPE, it was Chris Cavoli that built the new collective defense plans of Europe, built the new command and control, and reset SHAPE and ACO as a warfighting apparatus again. So right now we're somewhere between probably 2.5 and 3.0 as the Allies really rebuild and modernize their different capabilities depending on whatever the domain it is, whether it's ground, air, space.
As you sat there in shape, did it help to go back to the beginning of your career, to go back to kind of the origins of the mission of NATO, the collective defense mission that we had in the 80s, to help win the Cold War, to help frame kind of like, okay, we got to do some form of that, but we got to get all the Europeans deeply involved, right?
Yeah, I mean, we really had to start at the top. Chris Cavoli was instrumental in that. Is when we got to SHAPE, SHAPE had been reset as a more political headquarters, that had delegated a lot of the stuff down to other NATO command structure to oversee stuff like Afghanistan and Iraq and so forth. We had to reset the headquarters as a warfighting headquarters, as you traditionally would think. You've got an intel apparatus, you've got a current operations apparatus, you've got future plans. I mean, none of that stuff existed in the shape of 2022. And so, it was Chris Cavoli that reset that headquarters in the likeness that you would know, the stuff that we kind of grew up in Quarter Cav. And then we had to do it at Echelon, right? We had to do it at the Joint Forces Commands, and we had to do it at the TCCs, at the Theater Component Commands like Landcom and Aircom, and in the nations. Also resetting, their postures, right? Return to collective self-defense. So if you're seeing a transformation across the board in Europe. Now, the flip side of this is it's great to have great command and control. It's great to have plans. It's great to have a modernized alert system, but you got to have the capabilities below that, right? To have credible deterrence, and that's those are large standing armies again, in navies and air and in the other domains that are coming in there. The Allies are going to have access to cyber and space. And so a whole host of capabilities that need rebuilt and need to be rebuilt very, very quickly.
What's your assessment? I mean, so you were there when Cavoli came in and just gave a new mission, essentially, to NATO and the SHAPE headquarters. What was the state when the switch flipped? What's your assessment of the state of the individual nation's readiness then compared to where they are today? How far have they come in the last 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you just a real clear example, and I won't say who the country is, but I was involved on the eastern flank in early 2022 before the reinvasion of the Ukraine, because the U.S. and the UK knew it was coming, so we were trying not to do this through NATO. We were trying to do it through the United States Army, Europe, and U.S. Fifth Corps, trying to prep the nations. And many of these nations, they had no home defense plan, right? That didn't even exist. It didn't exist on the day of the reinvasion of Europe. That's wholesale change now. And it has happened. So every nation has now built their own host nation defense plans that are built into the NATO plans, and that are aligned against capability targets because a lot of stuff's going to have to be rebuilt, right? Um, the individual capabilities of the nations, right? So some of them got to, have agreed to like build out 3 new, medium weight brigades, but you don't do that overnight, right? And that's what's going to take time. I guess to answer you, it's wholesale change. It's real. It was led by Chris Cavoli, Jens Stoltenberg, and now Secretary Mark Rutte, and General Grishovich, who are continuing this on.
What areas do you think have come the furthest, and which areas do you think still have the biggest gaps in terms of capabilities for the European nations themselves? Not NATO as a headquarters, but as a for the individual.
I think the biggest gap out there, right, is integrated air missile defense, right? We see it playing out in the Middle East right now. If you don't have it, what it means. We see it in the Ukraine, right? How important it is to their national survival to be able to defend against all things in the air, right? And this is going to cost a lot of money, and there's a lot to be defended out there, and it's going to it involves sensors and everything else. So that's probably the biggest capability that needs to be built out, as quickly as possible. And of course, in all fairness to, all the allies, right? A lot of them have been, assisting the Ukraine. So as they rebuild this capability, a lot of the stuff has been sent east to help the Ukrainians defend themselves. So it's, we're in competition with ourselves, and that's a growth industry though inside of the alliance, inside of Europe, that's gonna grow out, and there's gonna be massive. It's gonna be at scale, and there's gonna be massive opportunity there.
Yeah, kind of aiming at our audience here, the government contracting community. Matt has a great website. It's just, I don't know how he got the domain. It's mattvw.com, and he has some blogs up there. He talks about the investments needed in European defense, and particular how what's been going on in Iran for the last few weeks. These challenges are no longer just theoretical, right? I think they're no longer just an icon on a board or a PowerPoint slide. It's bringing some urgency to the need for investments in these areas, particularly around the air defense, right?
Yeah, and the other one out there that's unpopular is dumb munitions, right? Somebody's got to build 155 shells. Somebody's got to build, 81 millimeter mortars, small arms. That stuff is, we're going to need millions and millions of rounds of this stuff. And, a lot of that industrial capability, right, got taken down. I mean, for a lot of reasons, environmental reasons. So that's going to have to be built back out. Those war stocks are going to have to be replenished, and Rheinmetall's, they're going after this, but it's going to be more than Rheinmetall that's going to do this. There's going to the nations are going to have to get involved in this. But a lot of people don't want to build 155 shells, in a city near you.
Right. Exactly. Not in my warehouse, right? So you also mentioned on your listing of kind of critical areas that the European defense needs to beef up on is around the electronic warfare. And you talk about it being the invisible high ground. What do you mean by that, Matt?
I, I think nobody can debate anymore that a key element, a key warfighting function that goes on every day in the Ukraine is the electromagnetic spectrum out there, Jake, and that's both finding and fixing, but that's also protection and disruption of your own protection, right? And electronic warfare. Most nations have just those capabilities got taken out decades ago because who would ever need that? And that's the essence of survival right now, both on the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, both of them. The electronic warfare is proliferated down now to like the squad level. I mean, the space over the Ukraine right now might be the most it's probably the largest jammed electromagnetic spectrum for a lot of reasons, mainly a protection of their own critical national infrastructure. So, that's a key component out there. And there's very few industries that I know that are building that out right now. And again, I think the nations got to look at this and figure out how do they build those capabilities in at scale, but at pace and formation, right, from operational headquarters all the way down to the team level.
So
And
how
by the way,
you're
these are capabilities that existed um, in the Cold War.
back in the day, right? For the
Yeah,
most part, a few of them are
yeah.
new, right?
Yes,
Uh,
there's a lot new out there, but that was a key component of protection.
so how do the Europeans they've allotted budget to this, right? As I understand, even the 3.5% of the 5% that of the NATO pledge of GDP that it's accounted for in terms of the greater plan. It's not just random allocation of budget, but you're listing long range fires. You're talking about the dumb munitions. You're talking about integrated air and missile defense. You're talking about AI driven information dominance, which I want to hear what you got to say about that. Survivability and the distributed C2, the command and control, unmanned warfare, and the machine tempo, which I thought was interesting, and of course the EW. What? How do the Europeans go about synchronizing the investments, and make sure it's all put together into a more holistic? Does one country focus on the long range fires and another country focuses on integrated air and missile defense? How does NATO pull that off? How does the European defense base pull that off?
Yeah, so when the defense plans of Europe that Chris Cavoli pioneered were approved by the nations, behind those were the capability targets that each nation needs to achieve to fulfill the minimum military requirements for those plans. So every nation has that stuff. It's the NATO defense planning process. It's managed by Allied Command Transformation. It's the other NATO headquarters that's across the Atlantic Ocean in Norfolk, Virginia. But they have them out there. I think that the challenge, though, it's an imperfect process, and some of those capabilities were in catalogs that really maybe don't reflect the current operational environment that we're witnessing in the Gulf or in the Ukraine right now. So so the countries are going to, they were given capability targets, but national sovereignty, they're going to have to adjust some of this stuff based off of what's going on. And, when these plans were conceived, unmanned warfare, really, wasn't, really focused on, because even the beginning of the Ukraine war, that didn't exist. But the nations have been given them. They know what they need to get to. So it's not a mystery. And then I think, you look at, some of the European nations out there, they're just driving forward. I mean, Poland has driven, they're buying all kinds of capabilities, right? So they have a broad spectrum out there. They'd probably have went after it the fastest. And you look at where they're buying their equipment from, right? A lot of it's coming out of South Korea right now because the South Koreans have the industrial base to deliver, right? So, but the capability targets are out there. The nations have them, and they'll adjust them. I mean, but it's gonna be a long road, right? This is because the Secretary General talks about it all the time. Is along with that is you got to have the industrial base to build this stuff
Well,
and build it quickly.
isn't that a gap though? I mean, every time this topic comes up and there's another conference, it seems to be how much have the planners, have the NATO member nations actually gone to industry and seen what is possible and understand what the capacities and the capabilities are in the industrial base? It seems like there's grand plans being made at a headquarters level, even at the nation level, but how do we know what's actually possible from an industrial base perspective?
Well, I mean, NATO headquarters, the political side, they have done a lot on this, of working directly with the nations to try to understand what's there. But Europe's got some hard decisions to make. Like, so I'll just give you an example. In the United States, my retirement funds can be invested in defense industries. Over here in Europe, they can't be. So there's a lot of barriers out there that are slowing heavy defense investment down because of just how programs are set up over here. Um, the challenge of securing supply chains over here, right? So if you're going to build something, nobody wants to buy stuff out of China that's going to be mixed in the system that they're buying. I mean, there's a lot of friction that's ahead of us as they try to rebuild the industrial base over here quickly and at scale. Um, and these are challenges and huge challenges. And right now, I think that's why Europe is so still dependent on U.S. defense industry, whether they want to be or not.
But that's an issue, right? This idea of sovereignty, system sovereignty, not being reliant on uh, third-party countries that you don't necessarily control. Right now, there's concerns about the U.S., right?
Yeah, I mean, you hear from the allies over here in the European nations. They want to buy European, but if you look at what the U.S. weapon systems, I'm not here selling U.S. weapon systems, but they're the king of the battlefield right now. Patriot works, PAC-3 works, HIMARS, long range fires, it works. I mean, the F-35, as expensive as it is the greatest weapon system in the sky right now. So, I think there's certainly there's talk amongst the European nations over here. Do they go together, do co-production on whatever a new Eurofighter would look like? I think we're a long ways down the road for that, though.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll get there based upon the current demands. Something wasn't on your list, and I got Dave Gelazada. You probably know Dave, who was up in ACT with space. Um, and his thesis is you got to win the fifth domain. You got to win the space domain. And without the U.S., NATO's kind of naked in terms of that domain. Where do you see investments in space?
Right now, hey, listen, there's very few space capable nations that have real space capability. The U.S. obviously is one of them. There's a few other nations over here. The Germans have talked about building a large space capability, but you have to have launch capability. I think that'll go the slowest. I think when the U.S. talks about backstop, this is going to be one of them. They're going to have to be the dominant contributor on space. But what you do see in Europe though is you see nations that weren't talking about having space capability now trying to build it, or expand it. Germany being one, France, the UK is heavily trying to go down that domain. So yeah, I agree with him that it's one out there, but I think this is where you need all capabilities, but where do investments need to be made first? And I'd offer up, the kind of list how I laid it out. Long range fires. I mean, you have to be able to reach out at distance. That's gonna have to be reinvested in heavily because that was completely divested in.
I see you're also a mentor with Diana, NATO's innovation group, and something we talked about before is, I mean, the U.S. kind of has Austin and Silicon Valley as its hub, innovation hub for military technology, defense tech, whatever you want to call it. And that there doesn't seem to be in Europe a proper hub where startups can come in and bring the latest technology, can engage with government buyers, can get up the learning curve on the procurement processes with NATO or with European defense space. What are your thoughts on the need for a kind of a centralized hub in Europe for defense innovation, defense technology?
Yeah, I think some capital is going to figure this out inside of Europe. That they're going to let's attract startups and defense startups like Austin. it's all things Austin. I mean, like, the primes are in DC and Alexandria, right? But like Austin, you go down there, there's hundreds of startups for defense down there. My men are one of them. Do NATO Diana, but right now NATO Diana is kind of like, you know, that's a large animal that's got offices all over Europe. But there's no centralized point for defense innovation where all the techs and startups are at. I mean, some capital is going to figure out, give them discounted office space, give them a tax break, and I think that they're all going to flock into. But right now, that place doesn't exist in Europe. Not like it does.
Where would you put it? What are 3 logical places to put it?
I think 3 logical places. One is Warsaw, right? Especially with Poland, who is leading right now in defense spending, and I think would be a dynamic place to put it in. I think the Baltic states, they would like it. Like either Vilnius, or Riga would like to have it in there. And then the other places, I think ideally situated is Munich, Germany, mainly because of centralized airport there, and the Munich Security Conference, which is still the paramount security conference, in the world. Somebody's going to figure it out. With a massive investment in 3.5, I see European startups everywhere. And Diane Accelerator and Innovator is a great one of pulling them along. A lot of these are European companies. But where does that go? Some big capital out there is gonna, or city's gonna figure out, like, how do we attract that business in? And some, quite frankly, some won't want it because the
That's right,
politics.
just the stigma of it. Yeah.
Yep.
I'd vote for Warsaw of those. I just think it's, I mean, they're showing how it's done at scale on across the board, and I know it's also a tech hub. That's something that needs to be done. It would seem a logical thing to do, and for some sponsorship of that, even at a NATO level, would make sense. What what about on the investor side? I mean, none of this happens without investors, and I think something the U.S. has done well, and even this administration's done well. Hey, 20 years ago, private equity, venture capital, they didn't want to talk about government contracting, right? And now, like, Stanford has a course in it, and I mean, there's investors, institutional investors, private equity investors. I had one guest talking about how the government's using venture capital as kind of a filter for understanding, because VC vets its investments so well. And so if you're VC backed, then that's seen as a good thing by the government as an investable technology that they could put on the catalog. Um, Over here in Europe, how do you see, where are we in that cycle of bringing in like real money, bringing in outside investors to help support the governments?
Well, I saw it in live action. I went to was part of a conference on the edge of the Munich Security Conference called Sparta. It was sponsored by a group out of Munich, and they brought in about 65 startup companies, and then they invited the investors in there too. Um, and so they were on the floor. They also invited a lot of chiefs of defense. Some came, some didn't. Well, what the big idea up in Munich of the team up there was, let's get the startups, let's get capital investors in the room, and let's all meet. They're going to do this again in Berlin in May for 2 days, and I think they're going to have 300 startups there. And they're not just German startups. They were from all the NATO nations in there. But the investors are out there and they're looking. The company that I met are out of Austin, Texas, and I won't say their name on this, but I linked them up there with 2 private equity investors. And they're looking at their technology. Do they put money into it or not? So it's out there now, because these capital investors see the opportunity there, right? Especially if you can get something going that it's going to have years of tail on it.
Yeah, and I'm kind of plugging you here, but it would seem very valuable for these investors to have tech savvy, experienced Europhile senior leaders that have an idea of where the trends are going, this laundry list of things that need to be invested, understanding where the gaps are in the market, therefore, where are the opportunities for new technologies, new manufacturing processes. What do you see your role in as you go into this next phase line? What do you want to do to help solve this problem?
Yeah, Jake, what I want to do is I want to help European defense grow. I want to connect um, the nations with the right people that can make responsible uh, choices and commitments to the alliance. Um, my role in there, I want to advise both investors. I want to help advise the nations as much as I can uh, to try to link the two up. There's not many people out there in this space that kind of understand that, particularly on the investment side. These investment companies, they have money, but they're trying to figure out, where do we put it against? So there's a gap in there that quite frankly 4 years ago nobody would have cared, right?
It's such a huge opportunity. The commitment by the NATO nations to go to 5% of GDP. Now, 1.5 of that is dual use, but still, dual use is worth investing in. Actually, might be more investable than pure military applications. Um, so the macro trend is there. The funding is going to move there. How they get the money, nobody really knows, but the commitment to do it is there. Uh, and there's so many gaps in the market. And I even argue on the services side. I mean, a lot of what we've been talking about are the manufacturing, but the Europeans, look, they got some manufacturing capability and they can buy it from Korea, but projecting the materials and the systems and sustaining them, maintaining them, that's something that they've relied so heavily on the US for over the last 20, 30 years. There's a whole services industry that needs to be built to support the European defense base. Would you agree with that?
It Yeah, 100%. I think that what these countries are all going to see when you buy a fleet of vehicles, which many of them are going to do, they're not going to have the armies that can self-sustain this stuff. A lot of this stuff's going to have to be service contract out. Um, it's just that's how it's going to go. So there's the opportunities for services to influence all that space is only going to be a growth process. I think over the next years. Um, Especially a lot of the really, really high tech stuff. It's going to come with an army of services and contractors behind it. That's just, you know, that's my lived experience. It's going to be the same in Europe. Um, the Particularly because this stuff is so complex to maintain and sustain it. And the other 1.5%, the dual use, the stuff that's got to go against the reinforcement and sustainment network, building out infrastructure, right? That the nations have pledged, there's going to be opportunities there too. That 1.5 is a misunderstood space that's massively important to the allies because that's the backbone of the theater, right? And that involves everything from multimodal transportation to building airfields that have the ability to sustain military cargo, etc.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, and even on the technology side, it's there's a lot of dual use technology. Cyber, I mean, what's the difference between cyber for our civilian infrastructure versus our military, right? It's a huge opportunity. So let's go ahead. Let's go forward. Let's go forward 3 years. We're in 2029. We just had an election in the U.S. Um, I'm sure there have been a lot of seats shuffled in European capitals. We had probably towards the end of the term of the new SACEUR, if not there's another SACEUR. We've seen that the U.S. has given up a couple of key NATO seats as well. Um, talk. What does European defense look like in 2029? How far have we come on this journey towards NATO 3.0?
Well, what's going to drive this journey? Let me just start with that. What's going to drive this journey is the Russian threat, Russian imperialism. What happens over in the Ukraine, right? Um,
So break
that's
that
going
down.
to
What does Ukraine look like 2029 in your mind?
my mind. I think Ukraine looks like some kind of frozen conflict. I think that the Ukrainians, um, they have demonstrated over the last 4 years, right, that they can stop the Russians at a very high cost and with a lot of assistance, but they have done it. But I think Russian intentions there, either Putin or post Putin, they have a clear goal, and that is to break NATO apart, either by political will, and that's the goal. So I think what we're going to see over the next 24 months is an acceleration of European investment that are going to start buying stuff very, very quickly. Now it may not be coming off an assembly line or be built yet, but the capitals are going to want to spend this money, and they're going to want to demonstrate it before the next NATO summit in Turkey. So I think this is going to go at a very fast pace that I don't think anybody's ready for, particularly either service side or the industrial side. And the threat's going to drive this. And I'd offer up, the more people that see this war unfolding in the Middle East realize, what 21st century warfare looks like, and it's not pretty. And so, I think this defense renaissance is going to go very, very quickly. I think in 2029, I think we'll probably be at minimal levels of what we need to rebuild for integrated air missile defense. I think, you're going to see the rebuilding of standing armies with a lot more platforms. Um, I think there is going to be heavy investment in cyber. I think you're going to see a growth of long range fires over here. They'll look different by nations. And I think the last one that's going to be vitally important that people are going into right now, and that is what the networks look like and how do you use AI. So you see the growth of Palantir over here. NATO, publicly, they bought Maven Smart System.
Right.
It's being proliferated throughout the alliance. That is the use of technology to build a kill chain and targeting chain at speed, linked up with AI. That has to happen. And so I think, that's going to be well on its way. So I think in 2029 you're going to see a networked European allies over here that are able to understand and make decisions off of the latest technology. And right now it seems to be going the Palantir way. But we'll see if that continues that way. But that's
the U.S.
another
system,
one.
though. That's the U.S. system.
It's a U.S. system. It was bought by NATO. Bought it. I'm not going to go down the nations over here that have it, because some of them publicly haven't said who has it, but a lot of them have bought it so they can have a common interoperability with NATO. I think we're seeing the utility of like what that stuff looks like. The Ukrainians have their version of it.
What's
It's not Palantir, but you see what it's done for their national survival and their ability to fight an opponent that's 3 times their size.
absolutely necessary? Let's say hypothetically, maybe you know the number. Let's say the mix right now of European defense posture is, let's say it's 50-50 U.S. versus um, European origin across the board. This is a big chunky number. Maybe it's 30-70, 30% European, 70% U.S. I don't know what the mix is. What's it look like in 3 years? How much have the Europeans insourced and built capacity for their own defense posture?
I think it could get. I think it could go 50-50. I think they could build that much out themselves. Um, I don't ever think it's going to be completely sovereign, just because this is on the innovation side, particularly in the United States. There's just too much innovation out there in the defense sector that I just don't see over here in Europe moving that quickly. And so I think the U.S. companies they're going to continue to bring solutions to modern warfare that are going to be at a pace that's just faster over here until the Europeans can figure out how to get that growth going, and get that innovation going. But it could be 50-50 at a certain time.
Back to the NATO 3.0, I think in your discussion at the very beginning, talking about procurement being the hard part? What does what does NATO, what does European defense procurement look like in 3 years?
I think, again, I think the threat's going to drive an acceleration where people are going to have to figure out, and they are, how to buy stuff at a quicker pace. Get the bureaucracy taken out of it. I think there's success stories out there. Again, you go to Poland or you go to Romania that they've quickly have bought down on capabilities that they need. Um, and there's some bigger nations that are really struggling on how to do this because of the bureaucracy and the politics that are behind this. But I think there's going to be, I think they're going to learn it. I think a lot of the bigger nations are going to begin to take some risk at large procurement services very quickly.
You, you see
I mean, the environment's only driving this, Jake. I mean, I don't need to say this. Yeah.
do you see NSPA, NCIA becoming more important from a procurement perspective, centralizing procurement?
Yeah, I don't know. We're never going to get centralized procurement out of NATO because these are always going to be sovereign decisions. NATO's helped in some. I mean, NSPA is going to have a bigger role, right? I think NCIA will have a bigger role too in these things. But in the end, the nations, these are very sovereign decisions when you determine like what is the platform you want to use, right? And it would be ideal if you know we could somehow get have more centralization, but the nations are just they didn't do it during the Cold War. They're not going to do it again. Um, but I do believe there's larger roles though for NSPA in NCIA. They're going to have to change their structures too, right? Because I mean, this is an interesting part, right? So Chris Cavoli changed ACO. He rebuilt the warfighting functions in it. So we did it at echelon. I just offer up inside of NATO headquarters. A lot of their functionality is going to have to be rebuilt to reflect collective defense again.
Yeah. Well, I could offer up they ought to consider contracting out procurement to make it better.
I think so too. Yep.
I think that's a
They need to outsource some of it.
they do, or at least bring in some expertise. You seem net optimistic, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for people like you that have so much of the institutional knowledge. I want to ask you for one word to describe your gut feeling about the future of European defense. What's one word you would use, Matt?
A renaissance. I mean, it's going to return. Renaissance.
Renaissance.
Um,
It's a new one. That's
it
good.
is. It is. This is what we're going to see over here, and the world security environment is going to drive this anymore. So I mean, we're on a road now, whether we want to be to or not. You know, we we how you rebuild credible deterrence is with real capabilities. And the nations know that over here. They really really do. And so I think that's this is what's going to accelerate everything a
Yeah.
lot quicker. So yeah, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic uh, that the nations will achieve what they set out to do. I think the 3.5% this year commitment was, I'd have never believed we would have seen that
Yeah.
2 years ago.
It's historic, yeah. And what's happened in Iran must just make them more urgent, right? Just creates more, makes it real. It's just so real.
I mean, Jake, look at over Turkey in the last 14 days. The last number I saw was 3 missiles were intercepted by NATO flying over Turkish airspace. Right where they were going to, what the targets were, I don't know. But that's a harbinger of a future of war. That we have to have the ability to do that.
Yeah. Renaissance. Good word, Matt. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time on a Monday morning to get together with us and do the podcast. You got so much to give, and for our audience out there, Matt's based in Garmisch. He's a global guy. He's one of our precision experts. If you want to engage with Matt, reach out to me. We can help put something together to help your company either get into the European defense space, or if you're in the European defense space and you're looking for where there are opportunities, there's no one better out there I've actually heard someone call Matt a Renaissance man, so I don't know if he's stealing that or not, but he's right at the heart of this Renaissance that's going on in European defense. And so definitely reach out if you want to have a discussion with Matt on how he can help you. So you're heading skiing now, Matt? Is that right?
Yeah, Jake, you know it.
Be safe out
So
there.
that's why I retired. That's why I retired in the mountains. Out of the military. So
Be safe out there. We're not young anymore. Tell your ski partner I said hi. And we're gonna probably have you back later on in the year or early next year to see how some of your premonitions have come to pass.
look forward to it.
All right. And everybody check out Matt's website again. It's mattvw.com. There's a nice clip there of a documentary where he's on the train to Kyiv with the Sec General talking about the NATO Sec General talking about the needs of the Ukrainians. That's pretty dramatic, very cool. But check out his website, mattvw.com. All right, I hope everybody enjoyed this episode of the Future of GovCon, and we got a great episode coming up next week. And everybody out there, remember that the future of GovCon is happening today. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Jake.
All right, so thanks for joining me on another episode of the Future of GovCon. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and some of the bold predictions. If you did, take a second, share it on your social media, subscribe on YouTube. If you have any ideas for future guests or topics you'd like to have covered, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always there, and you can always learn more about precision talent solutions at pts.careers. Look forward to seeing you next week on our next episode.